Okay, this is episode 48 of Counterpoints, and we've got usual co-host Moses.
Merry Christmas, Duncan.
Me. It's past Christmas now, so...
I know, but I didn't wish you one on Christmas, and, I was doing the traditional celebration of Christmas with all the mushrooms that you mentioned and, sitting under the trees.
Okay, yes. Yes, yeah. Especially that part where you go outside and you piss, and then sometimes people drink the piss again to reactivate that part's just key. Although the irony is, actually, I remember telling Moses that, and he goes, you can get high from the mushrooms as well. Anyway, no, obvious joke there. It wasn't even that good, was it? But I don't know. I still got the delayed surprise factor there. No, the thing is, actually, Moses there revealing a bit more than probably he should about our relationship, I mean... Listen, Sam, it wasn't just you, mate. It's just, he only cares about Anders now. He probably sent Anders a fucking massive wreath, like, oh, Merry Christmas, I love you. Meanwhile, I was just sat by an empty phone, like, is Christmas a different day in America as well? What's going on?
Are you using the phone that I gave you, motherfucker?
Okay, fair play. You win that one, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
What is this?
You win that one, Moses. Okay.
I gave him a nice little Google Pixel. Not the 2. Not that good of a person. Gave him the 1 after I was done with it and discarded it.
Still thought that counts.
Yeah, it's still a good phone, so I can't lie to that. Right, okay, so our guest for this one is mauisnake. You might have seen him on a past episode. I had him on the one that was him and Max Malit were on it. Both actually become my research assistants since then, so obviously just cannibalizing my own content for more content, basically. Why not? Just like sort of a human centipede of ideas. Although, except in that one, that doesn't make as much sense, because in that one, I'd be the one on the end eating all the shit, wouldn't I? So, I don't know how that one works. I don't know how that works. Maybe it goes, I've always got the comebacks, because obviously it's spun the other way, isn't it? Because I take whatever good shit they do, so I take the food, and I turn it into shit, and then I eventually pay them like a small fraction of it at the end of the... So actually, no, I'm on the front of the human centipede. All that matters is, I'm not the one eating shit. That's all I care about.
Are you saying that when you pump out content, you're taking their good ideas as food and cranking out shit?
Well, listen, that goes to that saying, Moses.
It started good. It started good.
Listen, that's the thing I've always thought was funny is whenever people analyze my videos that I do, they'll be like, "This is so biased," or "Look, he hasn't watched every game." It's like, dude, the series is literally like a vlog series. It's just called Thorin's Thoughts. It's not called official report on the way Envious plays in 20. No, it's just whatever I think about watching the games, isn't it? Guess what? I can be wrong. I mean, you're going to be hard-pressed to find real cases of it, where I can't make a good argument for it, That's what's so funny. That's the reason why that show, Put Up or Shut Up, was just almost designed for me. It wasn't actually, obviously, I wasn't even on the first episode, but it was the perfect format for me, because what people didn't understand about it is if you didn't actually agree with the answer you had to give, you just pretend you did, and you just argue around it, don't you? And obviously, I was just straight fire at that.
And with you just make it funny, so no one actually realizes that the opinion is shit. They just laugh at the jokes and hand out the points.
Yeah.
What happened to that show? I want more.
Don't know, mate. I thought it was pretty cool as well, but...
I want to be on that show, actually. That looks a lot of fun.
Yeah. We could take that show, and we could make it 10 times better.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll wait the appropriate amount of time until it clearly isn't going to continue, and then... just make our own version, but with a different title.
And we'll call it Around the Horn, perhaps.
Except the difference is, I definitely won't do that.
Points.
That's just a joke. But if one show was to appear that was similar, then that would just be parallel thinking, or some other such term for when you steal something. I don't know. So anyway, on this episode, we had an interesting abstract topic to start with, because mauisnake here... In fact, actually, this is really the story of why he hasn't created more of that actually pretty good content where he analysed top pro players and went into lots of topics. That sort of content's great. But you go to his YouTube channel, right? He does some of that every now and then the rest of it's him demo reviewing players that are pure garbage, but the entire demo. So his problem in general, right, is he's much like Launders, is he's way too obsessed with playing at a non-pro level and dreaming that he can keep climbing the ladder and get to the pro level, and hasn't realized, basically the real American dream, which is just give up and do whatever can make you money.
Content.
Your dreams are irrelevant. Just do whatever can make you... Listen, Moses would be playing right now if he could. You know what?
Absolutely.
He'd rather be the fucking... second best commentator in the world, debatable. But anyway, in the analogy, he'd rather be the second best commentator in the world than the 45th best NA pro trying to get onto NRG and messaging DAPs you need anyone, you need a player.
Come on, Duncan, have a little bit of respect. That'd be top 20.
Top 20? Maybe. Here's the thing. I'll give you this, Moses, and this actually ties into the topic. At least you have some context on how to play within the metagame and how to craft a style, which is one of the topics we're going to bring up here, because mauisnake had a good idea for a topic, which was basically, I mean, his phrasing was like, what's the difference between kind of like Mountain Dew, ESEA Premier type players and pro league level players, top pros that we think of, you know, the relevant players we see at the big lands. You can basically just take that, ignore the regional element of Premier and MDL, and basically just say, what is the difference between ostensibly semi-pro players and pro players? Because as you kind of brought up, and we can go into this to start, we can think of a few people over the last year and a half who've come into the top level of the scene from this level, and actually, funnily enough, a few of them have success early, or maybe for a few months they're good, or they're good in a certain context. But obviously, you really do thin the herd as you go on through the year, and a number of them fall off or become less relevant. And there's not that many really break through. And like, to me, the only examples I can think of over the last sort of like 2 years who actually made it would be like Hobbit's probably the best one. Stewie 2K's up there, obviously, pretty good as well. I would say maybe Body, but even he kind of had like a tough sort of last 6 months. So you can see that you maybe get 10, 15, 20 of these guys come through, but not that many really like look like they've got long pro careers ahead of them, and very few of them are star players. So where were you thinking with this to start out with? Because you were giving me an analogy before about Fitch from Gambit, right? Because he's a player that you looked into. So Fitch, obviously a player we only saw really after the player break when he came and replaced Zeus, and he came into the team. And obviously Gambit did pretty well at that tournament. They beat Astrologer, they came top 4, right? What were you thinking about him and his entry to the scene, and how does this break up in the topic of these players taking the next level up, as it were?
Yeah, so at Malmo, Fitch had a really good performance, and we've yet to see him repeat that kind of performance. And it became kind of obvious that his game, at least among pros, kind of just is so one-dimensional that they can anti-strat him just a little bit, or they can just kind of know where to place their crosshair, and he's kind of going to just be there. And when he plays other spots that he's getting used to, he's experimenting more, but he's not per se taking it up just all that well. He has a few spots that he's really comfortable with, and they worked against Astrologer. They didn't know what he was going to do in that first tournament.
Yes.
But nowadays, I mean, if he tries a new spot, he hasn't played against professionals, maybe I guess in scrims, but he hasn't played against the pros on the big stage in that spot, and he's just not as comfortable with it very clearly.
Yes. I mean, what's funny is this is actually a very abstract topic, or rather I'll make it abstract. That is something I've thought for many, many years. It's one of the reasons why, this might sound weird, but one of the reasons why when someone initially has a little burst, like they have 2 or 3 tournaments where they look really good, I'm usually pretty skeptical. Not because I don't think they had the good tournaments, they did, but I always trust that the pro scene of players with so much experience, especially once your team gets relevant, of scouting teams, etc., it happens to teams and players who take the next step up. People figure out what their strengths are, and these are the best teams in the world, the best players in the world. They will then figure out how to shut you down, how to counter you. And so, funnily enough, there's actually, I can give you a really good sports analogy for this, which is if you come into something like the NBA or the NFL, right, you might be like, let's say, a great athlete, or you just like, you've come out of a great coaching program. Maybe you have a really good strength initially, but one of the things a lot of fans, unfortunately, can never understand, just because it's such a counterintuitive concept, is that what you see the player doing at the highest level of competition isn't necessarily what he would choose to do if he could just do anything. His go-to move, or his thing that he did last round that worked, might not work this time, because people now know, if you're a star player especially, what you're going to do. So for example, in the NBA, if you're a really good 3-point shooter, right, yeah, you'll come in the NBA, you'll hit a few 3-point shots, but if people figure out from scouting you now, oh, wait a minute, this guy has nothing off the dribble, he can't go around me, now they will defend your 3-point shot 10 times better, because they never have to worry about doing anything except stay really close, put a hand in your face, and making you take a really hard shot. So what's the Counter-Strike equivalent of this? How do these guys get figured out, do you think?
Well, I think just as you play a match, you'll see that a certain player likes to, for example, if they're an opper, they might be really aggressive, so they like to re-peek over and over and over again. And the way to counter that would be posting an op up on him. You just throw one flashbang, and then you just put your opper on his likely re-peek spot, and that's going to catch him. That's how that's how SK can catch Stewie sometimes when he's opping. He likes to re-peek. For Fitch, it's just a matter of maybe smoking out his spot or flashing him. It's not all too difficult to use utility if you know exactly where the guy is going to play.
Okay. So Moses, obviously, especially in the NA scene, you see a lot of these players get their chances because the NA scene isn't that deep actually at the pro league level. Obviously, a lot of these players get the bump up to the lower teams. And, we see sometimes they have a little streak, they look decent. I mean, I'm thinking of someone like the Selfless and the Splice players over the last few years, but not that many of them, like we've kind of discussed at the beginning, not that many of them really make it. So what do you think the factors are that cause players to, like, they clearly have some talent, they just, something stops them from making the next level to being like a real pro, right?
Yeah, I think most of it has to do with the fact that, especially in North America in the pro scene, we have like 3 or 4 teams at the top, and those are the ones you want to get on. And if you're a young player who gets moved up and you get onto a pro league team, they're not they don't have a great sense of like what they want to do inside the game, and I think that's where you get lost. I think a lot of people, I've said this a number of times, I think a lot of people don't realize that it's easy to catch up to pro players in terms of your individual skill. It's all about how you use it within the team and within the framework. A lot of it comes down to, like you guys have been saying, is coming up with like a new way to play the game, not just being one-dimensional, coming up with different ideas. And I think if you look at some of the stars in North America, well, I mean, the best one that I can think of off the top of my head is someone like Twist. If you look at how he plays in Mirage at the A bomb site, when he's defending, he's always inside that bomb site, and teams still get caught off guard by it. I don't know how he hasn't been countered yet, but that's an easy one to realize, that Twist likes to play inside the bomb site, and he's still doing it, 6 months after we saw him kind of, go nuts the major qualifier for Krakow. So there's an easy way to counter that. He's going to have to figure out new aspects of it, but a lot of it comes down to the team environment that you're placed in. How willing are your teammates to actually work with you? In North America, there's not a lot, I feel. That's kind of the sense I get, especially in the lower tier teams. Everyone has their set way of playing, and they don't want that disrupted by a new player. And that's kind of where you get your jump up, is by playing new spots, doing new roles, and you kind of experience what everyone else is going through. And once you kind of get that experience, that new perspective from a different role, you can kind of tweak and adapt the way you play your primary position, or what you're used to kind of, either assist a teammate who has to do that job or counter opponents who are doing those jobs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about Twist is he's a really good example because, first of all, obviously, like, his talent is so great that he actually just becomes a really, really extreme version of that. Because, first of all, like, admittedly, he's 17, so we give him a break. Like, he's very, very inexperienced in his career and life itself. But what's funny is, if you remember his come up, even when he first joined Team Liquid, he wasn't as good as he is now, because funnily enough, he had to literally be shifted role from the role that he would have chosen. Like you saw, he did play like a bit of a beta, and he wanted to be someone who was sort of off lurking and could make sort of kind of like rank S type plays, basically. And instead, when they put him with the group and he became more of like a follow-up player, now suddenly his talent was applied seemingly 2 times over. He became this potential superstar. So that's another factor, right, is that sometimes players themselves don't always know what's best for them. And so hence you can see, like, when a great in-game leader or joining a great team can have an impact on you and shape this for you, because if you leave it to the player to figure out, well, trial and error can take a long time.
I think also there needs, I'll bring this back a little bit because, Duncan, after so many of these episodes that I hate the concept of roles as a player. I absolutely hate it. And I think one of the big things that we need to start doing, or players need to do at this lower levels, is don't pigeonhole yourself in one role. Don't join a team and be like, I'm the entry fragger, this is what I want to do, or I'm the support player, or I'm going to be the star, I'm going to be the second player in on everything. Like, do different things on different maps if that's what it is. Maybe you like taking a fight in bathrooms on Overpass, so maybe you want to be the entry fragger there because you feel really comfortable with all the angles on that fight. But maybe you go to maybe over towards long A on Overpass, you're not comfortable with those long ranges, so you go the follow-up player. And different areas of maps, you can have different roles based on your strength as a player. I always hated long range fights. I liked having obstacles. I liked having the cover that you could get in your opponent, so you can kind of really predict the angles and you kind of have a sense. So if you keep pigeonholing yourself into one kind of role within a team, you're never going to improve in the other areas, and you're only hurting your own development. And I think that's one of the big things as well that kind of stops players these days from becoming these great superstar players. I don't know when this obsession with being like the best player in this one specific role came from, but I think it actually hurts players more than it helps them.
It hurts players in the sense that it does stunt their development. But when you're trying to build your own name and trying to just become, just get on a better team, get on a semi-professional team, get on a professional team, you're going to do what's comfortable for you until you get onto that team. Until you make it, you're making nothing. You're literally just throwing your life at this game, day in and day out. You're practicing so much on just one aspect of the game, but if you become really good at that, you will get noticed eventually, and that's where the draw is. If being a super versatile jack of all trades kind of player is great if you're already a professional, but before you make it, that's why people do it. I'm just saying. I don't think it's the right way to go about it, but I think it's.
Don't you? I think you would get noticed quicker if you are a player on a team who's winning. You know, like I think if your team is like winning and rising through the ranks, you're going to get noticed because your team's going to get more eyeballs on it. Because you know, for me, like, you know, I haven't been involved in the lower divisions of North American scene for a number of years now. But what's that new team that's rising up? And this is actually countering my point entirely. Rise Nation, oddly enough.
Oh yeah.
Once I hear that name and I see them start doing some upsets in some online tournaments, and then all of a sudden the next time I see the Rise Nation playing a game, I tune into it because I've seen them have some good results. I've seen a lot of chatter about how good this team has been playing from pros and NA, so I make a point to tune into it. And I think if you're a player who's on like a Premier or a Mountain Dew League team, and your goal is to do good enough individually to get picked up and like, you know, stolen from that team and brought into a pro league team, that's the wrong way to go about it. Your goal should be to make that team as good as possible, be the best player you can within that team, and start beating those pro league teams in the assorted online tournaments, or win Mountain Dew League and get moved up to pro league and then show yourself there. That's the best and most efficient way I can think of to make a name for not only your team but for yourself as an individual, as being a key member of that team.
Yeah, without a doubt, that is gonna, any team that wins, I'd say every team that wins ESEA main and Premier just get a lot of eyeballs on them. Yaster on Complexity now, he was the all-star player for his main team. Grim from Soar Gaming, they just won main, and now he's getting he got tryouts with, I think, Ghost and Rogue, and they might even win Premier also. They're actually in the MDL finals against Rise Nation, Soar Gaming, and if you win, then everyone looks at your team. Everyone will start to actually watch your matches. But if you're on the team that's in third or fourth place in these divisions, you just want the best stats, because there's not many people pouring themselves into a main demo or a Premier demo as there should be. Yeah.
Sure.
If they want to actually scout talent.
I mean, another factor, though, if I think from the player side of things, is they're also, because they don't necessarily get forced to become more versatile, and what they're doing works, they stick with what works, you know, they stick with what to them seems efficient. So they get very good at like entry fragging, or they're really good at being what they think is lurking. Admittedly, if you're lurking on like a Premier level, you actually haven't experienced lurking yet, because you have no idea what happens when some fucking superstar player comes around that corner and you think that you're in some super spot, you know. You will learn very fast on that role. But the point I want to make is that these players, because of talent usually, get noticed and they get into a top team. And there's two ways it can go. One, either you join a top team, and this definitely happened in teams like NIP before, and you join a top team, and even if you were recruited for being a talent, like let's say you were recruited, like Draken was, for being the star player of your old team. When you join NIP, odds are you aren't going to be put as the star player of NIP. So now immediately you're going to have to learn and hopefully adapt to a new role, because you're moving into a team where you maybe do have something of a role, or someone tells you, I want you to do these things here. And unfortunately, with that type of a player, maybe they don't even feel like they can have the input to be like, I want to do these other things. They kind of think I have to kind of like get my feet under me first. And then the other side of the equation is sometimes you get put in a role, like some of the players we've mentioned who, you know, they were doing a good job at it. I think you could even throw, as a more extreme version, like Kirby into this. He was doing a great job as an entry frag in Astralis when they first made that glaive switch. But I think he is one of the guys where you've seen him kind of decay over time, because all these teams have seen him run into the bomb site 500 times. They know what his tendencies are. They know where his strengths are. I'm sure they know if you get him in an extended fight, his spray goes to shit because he's just spamming his wrist all over the place, isn't he? Like, you know, people figure out your tendencies. And so obviously he's on the very highest level. I don't blame him as much. But you can see on the different various levels we have, it takes players a while to figure out that just doing the same thing that worked before isn't going to work again, you know.
I think as well, I mean, to that point, especially with Astralis, and I know I feel the same way about Virtus Pro, the guys that are like the guy that allows Astralis to stay at the top through this device injury and everything is Dupree. And look at him this year. He's been a lurker at times. He's been an entry fragger, and now he's opping. I think over at Virtus Pro, you have someone like Neo, who's been the opper, who's been like an anchor player at a bomb site, who's been the in-game leader. It's these guys who have force themselves into new roles and force themselves to learn different aspects of the game that are able to keep these teams through slumps, at least competitive still. I mean, it's a critical thing to be able to do, is to be able to switch up roles and still be impactful. That's all I got. That's where
Taco switched his role incredibly well. From being pretty hard entry guy, being even aggressive in defaults, now he's playing like the position 5 role, just doing everything at the back end. He just watches the flank for like half of the round, and then sometimes has to try to clutch a 1v1 or 1v2 or whatever, just finishing the rounds out and stuff like that. Something he was totally never used to when FNX would play that role, but now he really has to do it, and he does it really well too.
Yeah.
I mean, just going back to like kind of the idea of this concept in Mountain Dew League players or Premier players or whatever FPL players, whatever the lower division is over in Europe, is you cannot be a player. You cannot be a player on a team whose goal is to get picked up, like is just to get snatched away from your team. Because if you're doing that, you're thinking, and you're right. This is if that's your goal, the only way to play is individual and to get your stats up and to hope maybe no one watches the demo. Maybe everyone's just looking at these stats, and maybe people play me in FPL or rank S enough that they know I'm good individually and they grab me. But if you're thinking that way, you're never going to properly learn how to play within a team, and then you get picked up by these pro level teams, and you have no knowledge of how to play the game with a proper team, with any kind of structure, and you have to learn that as you go. And I think that's more crippling than doing it the other way. Like I'd rather spend the year at a lower division learning how to play the game right within a team, and then pick up the individual skill, pick up ground in that sense once you get into the professional divisions. So I think it's just kind of backwards right now if that's the goal that's going on.
Until there's actually talent scouts out there for these teams, I think it's going to stay like this, sadly. I'm not a fan of this, playing for stats, and for people to play for stats, and for people to just play the same role over and over again so that they can get the best stats that they can get. But until CLG actually has like a talent scout that is really dedicated to watch demos of tons of different players and not just pick the top 30 guys in main with the best stats or anything like that, then people are just going to play like this.
Sure.
Well, CLG also had to spend some money. That would have been a big thing as well. They didn't really want to do that.
That's
which
why
I guess
they were out there in the fucking bargain bins,
Yeah.
weren't they? Looking for the nickel copy of like James, I don't know, James Brown's like 1960 album. Like, oh, it's the original. Right, nice, get it. This will go for a lot on eBay.
No, but I think that concept of talent scouts or some kind of a scout or like the analyst who's looking at the lower divisions as well is critical, because as we've seen over the years of professional Counter-Strike, and Duncan, you and I will know this from even way back in the 1.6 days in early Counter-Strike, players are a terrible judge of who they should pick up and bring into their team and be their teammate. They are a god-awful judge at who to pick up and who to keep on the team. So that's a decision that needs to get taken out of their hands, and I don't foresee it happening for some time, to be honest.
Put it this way, we could make maybe we should do this one time when it's like a holiday episode or something.
Yeah.
We could do an amazing episode, right, where it would be like, guess what pro they were talking about, and I would just tell you over the years things that other pros told me, and like some of them, like the whole point is I'd pick some that you could get, but some of them where you would never get. Like they would be saying about this one guy, just baits all the time, like not a very high IQ player, just holds angles all the time, like
Eco-fragger.
That would be like fucking get right before he just like went off completely, became like one of the best in the world. That's like the sort of, the people would tell, nah, he'll never make it, that guy. Yeah, get another one, Eco-fragger. Yeah, just does that. It's like, so these are some of the best players of all time. But again, in that scenario, that player obviously was on a team that he lost to him and he felt like his style was bullshit, so he didn't respect it and he had biases. And maybe the worst is when personal things get drawn into it and you have to know that guy has a personal beef with him and that's why he's downplaying this whole guy's skill, or the other way around, that he's best mates with him and that's why suddenly he thinks this guy who's in like not that good a team super duper good and is going to be the truth. And it's like some of them are outrageous, the player opinions. But actually that ties into another issue, is that first of all, the way Moses is framing it obviously is like what you would do if you were a player trying to make it. Well, kind of to tie into the point I made earlier is I've always thought one of the things that ruined Counter-Strike is the same thing that happened in a lot of pro sports, right? So in pro sports, the best example for me is basketball, because it's one of the games I know the best. People have often made the case, quite rightly so, that Michael Jordan, in becoming the best player ever, basically ruined the NBA. Because what happened was, until Michael Jordan, typically your best player wasn't the shooting guard, and if usually the shooting guard actually wanted him to be a high efficiency player, and Michael Jordan wasn't a high efficiency player relative to other positions in the game. Now, he was very, very good as a shooting guard. And the problem with this is every kid who grew up watching Michael Jordan was like, that's how you play basketball. I want to be the guy who takes 30 shots a game, always takes sort of the game winner at the buzzer beater. Now, they don't realize that, no joke, maybe like 3 people ever in the NBA could do that as the main star and win championships. It just didn't really happen otherwise, So the problem is all these players who came out like that don't seem to realize, like, most of you will never make the pro level at doing that. And even the few of you who do, it's probably just not the best way to play the game, Like, if anything, he did that in some ways in spite of his position. He was just so good at the game. So likewise, unfortunately, I do feel like a lot of the stats whores, it's not just that you can see the stats, it's that they watch the game and they watch like Nico or in the past Forrest or, the super high skill level player. And they're like, right, I'm a skilled player. I want to be that type of player. And they don't realize, even if you could make it as a pro, right, well, which team's given up that kind of a spot on their team to put you in? Odds are Nip's not going, you know what, actually, we're going to kick Forrest. You're in, mate. You're doing Israel. Like, you're not going to, are you? You're joining Forrest's team, if anything. So you better have something else in the toolkit, as it were. Something else you can do. And by the way, maybe even to just earn the chance to get a spot where you will get the chance to do that. Maybe, you get in a team and you can do other things in the team. And then one day someone like a Forrest does retire or a Magus gets kicked in. Hey, now it's your chance to do that role. But you'll never get to that point in your career if you're so one-dimensional. I mean, there was a great quote once that said, specialization is really good if you're an insect.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good line, right?
Yeah.
So by the way, all the insects out there watching the show, stick with it. You guys are straight fire. Keep carrying leaves and stuff and injecting fucking slugs with your DNA or something that sprouts out of them and kills them. I don't know. I haven't seen that many documentaries recently, lads. Are most players on the level when you play one-dimensional? Do they tend to do you get many people who kind of try to be all-around players?
At my level?
Yeah.
There's some players that, I mean, I have a teammate that I've stuck with for a few seasons that tries to do everything. He tries to be as like complete of a player as he can possibly be, and that's why I've stuck with him, and that's why I just believe we could do something with because we both try to be really complete players and then fill that around us. But results speak for themselves in the sense that neither of us have gotten picked up to any kind of better team. Not trying to just self-promote ourselves, but just like the players that we see every season in, season out that do move up are I wouldn't say all of them are one-dimensional, but a lot of them, we kind of know what their game is, and you kind of can abuse it in the long run if you know what someone's specific game is, and they're not taking different roles in the routes. They're taking the same route. They're taking the same routes, and they're taking the same roles in those routes.
Yeah. And the funny thing is as well, like another reason why I don't always blame newer players, because as we've kind of outlined here, where we're talking about analysts and in-game leaders, etc., in traditional sports, you have a whole coaching staff your entire life, from high school to college. Yeah. They're helping you figure out things like, how are you going to play? How are we going to use you? Hopefully they're aiding you. So, for example, one reason why I can't blame some of the newer players for thinking that they can do the same things over and over again is if you watch the best players in the world, they do. Like, Device goes to the same spots on Overpass over and over again. Cold Zero takes the same route on Mirage, seemingly every T-side I watch. The problem is, though, that's like a classic example of where those players have mastered the game. They're doing that because that now is the most efficient play, and you can't stop them. There's if you can execute something perfectly, maybe it is unstoppable. The problem is, if you are like a newer player or someone who has 6 months under his belt, you don't even know what they can throw at you yet. You can't make that call that's the perfect move to do. You have to. You have to adapt your game and develop it. And especially, unfortunately, admittedly, a lot of pros think this way who aren't even new. A lot of them really do have this stupid logic of like, well, something worked a lot before and it didn't now, so it was just a fluke now, or it just was like, they never can. They're always very slow to pick up when someone's adapted to what they were doing.
Yeah. Even, just going off that, back to the basketball analogy, LeBron just always steps left when he takes a jump shot, but if he's that good at it, doesn't matter. So that's what a lot of players in Counter-Strike can get away with too.
Sure.
Yeah, I would have loved when I was younger to be able to watch like a demo of like a Simple and been like, that's the player I want to be, but like I can't make the plays that Simple makes. I'm just not that skilled, and my brain never goes to those as options because I can't hit those shots. So if you're watching a Simple demo being like, this is exactly how I want to play, you're gonna get your shit pushed in more often than not, I imagine. Mm-hmm. So I mean, there is that kind of idea. There is like a certain amount of you have to be a little bit humble, which is probably not an easy thing to do if you're at that level. I think the interesting thing that I most often see at the lower levels, and I guess a lot of this is based off like forum posts that I see, or on Twitter, or on Reddit comments and things like that, which probably isn't the best way to do it. But I notice a lot of times that people say the thing that ruined Counter-Strike and the thing that ruined North American Counter-Strike is, the service like ESEA that has like introduced stats and everything like that. And that is the biggest load of bullshit I have ever heard in my entire life. Like, ESEA is a tool, and you will get out of ESEA what you put into it and how you use it. And you do not have to focus on the stats portion of it. The stats portion of ESEA is first and foremost a business decision, as something that helps them offer new product to clients, something cool that you can point to your stats in a game and be like, I dominated here, I had a really good game. It's not like some indication of how they're going to be across their career when it comes to matches or scrims. So you don't have to use the stats. And I get so annoyed by people who go into PUG saying, everyone's chasing their RWS, and it's like, yeah, but you're just in a PUG by yourself. This isn't meant to be like an indication of what you can do. Use the PUG to practice. Use it to say, instead of like being the lurker, I'm going to try being the entry fragger, and then maybe you get to see, play a different bomb site on a certain map, so you get that experience, and that's where you can start to develop and hone your skills. And as long as you use something like ESCA or Face It to that degree, then it can be a tool to help you, instead of just be like, oh, they have stats, everyone's going to play for stats now. Even if that's true for some players, like you individually can choose to use a service differently and be better with it.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's the people that say, they have. I mean, some people with high ADR, high ratings, high RWS, whatever, they don't get picked up because people see through the fact that they are just hunting ecos. They're hunting on certain rounds where they shouldn't be. They're just pushing when they shouldn't be. They don't have a complete game as well.
Put it this way, the simplest way to say it would be this, right? The problem is, if that line of thinking of that excuse, like, stats in ESEA ruined NA, well, then we would be able to go and track that, like, oh, look, yeah, all the recent pickups and all the best players were super high stat scores. But actually, if you are a beta, for example, and you just get loads of eco kills from baiting people, you won't get picked up. Like, people will immediately see through that. Like you're saying, it's kind of empty calories, right?
Yeah, people understand that for sure. And the thing is that great players have a way of getting their own, and they'll pretty much always get good stats. I mean, coldzera is not hunting eco frags ever, and yet he still puts up the best numbers in nearly every tournament he goes to. It's like, and a lot of good players like Stewie, for example, he wasn't hunting eco frags or baiting viciously or anything like that. He was just really good. He had really good numbers because he was really good. There's a correlation between, you're not going to find some 60 ADR player and be like, okay, this guy's got the most complete game ever. He's definitely the future of North America because he knows how to throw a flashbang and he knows how to entry. It's going to be, no, he probably should have better stats than that if he's really that good. Like, there's probably something about his mechanical skill that's actually just totally lacking if he has that bad of numbers. So the stats they don't tell a story, but they help you outline it. I'd say.
I think another factor as well is that when we talk about this level, so generally, if you think about how many teams are in Pro League, is it like 16 teams in Pro League now? Was it 14?
I think it's 14.
Okay, well, there's enough teams in both divisions of Pro League, EU and NA, that almost every competent pro is basically in Pro League, except for the rare examples, where like Virtus Pro wasn't it, etc. Like very, very extreme outliers.
It's like so actually
another problem I see in this particular discussion is that players think they've been playing Counter-Strike when they were at the semi-pro level and they were an MDL. They think, oh, I'm playing Counter-Strike now, I'm with a team. Oh, I'm playing this team I know. You haven't played Counter-Strike yet. You were basically just playing a higher level PUG. Like most of those teams have very simplistic tactics. They actually have very defined roles for this exact reason. They have a good player who, he's pretty good at entry and taking duels, right? He goes first. That's how we start the tactic, That isn't tactics. Like part of the reason why those sorts of players, if they get to the pro level, will have a hard time is because maybe in their team, if they were having an off game and, their entries weren't really going for them, they played a little bit more passive. I'll play a bit further back. I'll do what I want here. I'll choose not to go in. If you join a top team and they have a strat, you do your part in the strat. It doesn't matter. There's no sorry, boss, I'm not feeling it today. Can I just not be the entry? No, that's why I always say I never judge entries in CSGO as heavily on stats as I do the other players. Because I remember some of the games like last year in 2016 Envious, I would watch some of their games, and for Apex, this is how you know this guy is a soldier. He was just running through a brick wall over and over again every round, and his in-game leader clearly didn't have some great adaptation. It would just be like, right, we're going B again, so in you go. And it's like, that's not fun, and none of these players are doing that, I would guess, at a semi-pro level. They have a lot more wiggle room, than what happens when you play real, here's the key point, metagame Counter-Strike, where not only what you do has to make sense, but logically what the other team do makes sense. People aren't making random plays just pushing around all the time, at least generally, as a broad stroke,
By the way, God bless Apex, God bless guys like Freiburg. The amount of times those two have had to play in matches where their in-game leader just doesn't have a good feel for a T side, and you just watch them running backwards through smoke, hoping they don't get fucking blind. Oh, that's poor bastards.
Basically the opposite of players trying to bait for stats, because in their case, they could even play a little bit half-hearted and probably get slightly better stats and still lose the game, but not look as bad. But those guys actually understand, and this is obviously a core concept if you're an entry guy, which is that whether you have good stats or not is not going to decide whether the game is won. You are going to have to set someone else up probably to get his good stats. So it's a totally different mentality. And I doubt that many players at the semi-pro level have bought into that because it's such a rare way of thinking.
Hey, you don't even have that many players at the professional level who've bought into it. Those are the only two hardcore entry fragger guys I can think of. I think that kind of style of entry fragging is kind of faded away a little bit. But I mean, there's still very few people in the pro scene who would even want to do that, even if they don't have an entry fragger on their team. If
you watch Rush nowadays for Cloud9, he actually takes the worst rolls and then entry frags. He'll do the taco thing where he watches the flank for the entire round, then he actually somehow manages to run in first every time on any kind of execute. So props to Rush for actually being the entry. Also, one of the best piece of advice Freakazoid ever gave was that if you play entry, you have to not care about stats, and that's why that Cloud9 team was pretty good, because he just trusted his teammates so much behind him that he knew that if he runs in first, if Shroud knows where someone is, Shroud is going to kill them. So, I mean, taking that same lesson, Freiburg.
Well, that's debatable.
Yeah. Well, his what he said at the time was pretty inspiring. Regardless.
Yeah, I understand.
The sentiment's fantastic.
Whether Shroud killed them.
It wasn't always accurate. Yes, exactly. Yes. He might have been wrong about the last part.
Yeah. Just having faith in your team is pretty admirable, though.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, that's also another way to reformulate that is even some good players who definitely can play a certain role in a team and maybe even perform to a high level. Part of this aspect of the stats thing isn't even just that you play purely for stats, because I don't think that many people are so cynical they literally think, oh, my stats are bad, right, I'm gonna have to sort of bait one guy here to get a kill but then save it. No one's really that genius they can think that far ahead. But the point here is, if you are too individually focused, you're already going to have problems here, because again, especially once you get higher up the scene, it is more about the team and what you can do in this round to help sometimes your teammate, or how he can help you. If you again are thinking only individually, you might end up baiting someone because you didn't know that he was actually sacrificing to allow you to get these kills now. So you end up just baiting him and getting a kill that doesn't help the team, instead of following up or throwing a flash for someone, and that then turns into winning the round, And that's obviously just a shift in mentality that you could just say happens from this level to the higher level anyway, because a lot of those players haven't been part of real teams. Admittedly, those teams aren't good, so they don't have the faith that they would do what you need if you need to. But it's certainly, I think this change in mentality has to happen if you want to endure as a pro level player.
Yeah, and even to get there, this is. I think that's the big thing. I think that's probably where, and it's always the hardest aspect to be able to assess, even for professional players, is the mentality factor and the mental game of Counter-Strike. And I think that's probably where the biggest progress can be made, as I would imagine at the MDL level, without having ever really spoken to anyone about it. You might know what the mentality of players is at that. I imagine it's pretty shit. I imagine it's pretty pretty tough to deal with at times. But that mental game and being strong enough mentally to make an adjustment, to maybe admit you were wrong, maybe change something in how you play, or just to keep going when you have bad stats, when you seemingly have bad games, when you hold tab, but you're doing the right thing for your team. So those are all things that need to be learned as you progress up the ranks.
Yeah, the first thing you should look at when you press tab is the scoreboard of how many rounds you have, and then maybe even team money before you even look at your kill death, honestly. I mean, all those are more important to winning the game than actually your ratio.
Unless you have 0 kills, in which case the next time there's a Nico round, you go rush for that shit and you get 2 kills up on the board.
Yeah, you need to get yourself on the board every time. As long as you have more than 0, and you're fine.
Well, I mean, at that point, that's just self-preservation, isn't it? You've got to have a retirement plan that involves not retiring now.
Yeah,
okay. Right, how about then we'll close up the show then by we'll do sort of like our thoughts on players of the year, this sort of thing. So I know that people will always, in these discussions, sadly, just think of the most recent tournaments because it's the memory that's the most vivid in your mind. It's who you're going to think of, etc. Right. So obviously, if we talk about for all of 2017, we have to really cover all of 2017. So for player of the year, best CSGO player of the year, right? I realize people will think that this is like not even debatable, blah, blah, blah. But that's just because most player of the year awards in every sport, even though they don't actually have a very strictly defined set of criteria, realistically they do. Like oftentimes in basketball, you do have to be like the best scorer. That typically is the main function. It's very rare that someone wins as a point guard for the assists. It's just happened very rarely in history. So in Counter-Strike, people mainly do, when they say best player, mean like, I would put it like this. Most people's criteria goes like this. You have to be among the best stats, and we're typically talking about best stats in terms of fragging, and then probably within that, something like differential, and then finally your team has to go far enough in tournaments that's considered also like a legit MVP type performance for that tournament. And then people typically tend to add it all up together and somehow arrive at a name they think feels, it tends to be feels because you can't really calculate it as much, who they think it feels like at the end of the year. So realistically, who do you think's put in this category? Who's a real candidate for player of the year? Not just like a good player who can maybe go there. Who's like a legit candidate, mauisnake?
Cold
Zera from SK.
Yeah.
Fair play. That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Taking the low-hanging fruit.
Nico, for sure.
Nico from FaZe. Anyone else? Because I feel like those two have already done a lot right there.
Yeah.
Right? So to join that company is already tough. So do you think anyone else deserves to be up there in that company?
If the results were better, config, simple, they're both insane.
Yeah.
They
that's the
contributed
problem.
so much.
I think in terms of a lot of the stats, Simple already has an amazing stats, but his problem is, as people have pointed out correctly, he's played somewhat like half the maps of those other guys we're talking about. So they've done the same thing, but over twice as many maps. Now, yes, you do obviously have to give him the caveat that he did it with a much worse team. So that in its own ways is a massive boost. He did amazing things, but it is tough. Here's the thing, okay? I could actually use all those reasons, like all those very contextual based reasons. I could see a world in which I would give Simple Player of the Year if there were different players ahead of him. Like, say, the team that won... Like, here's a great example. Let's say Astralis had been the team of the year. Right? Yes, Device is a very good player, and he's a very good all-round player, but he doesn't necessarily, like, bang the whole server superstar style every time. Like, they are very much a team. So in a world where Astralis had been the best team, I could have made enough of a case for Simple. His problem is, Nico and Cold Zera, if they're even slightly behind him, which is very debatable, everything else is there for them. So it's tough to see how you could put him ahead of them, right? When they're doing it over more maps, in tougher situations, tournament to tournament. You kind of have to just make it between those two, I feel like, to be fair.
I honest to God, I'm just going to throw this name out there because I think he definitely deserves it. I would put Rain in this category to have the conversation across the whole year.
No, because that's my problem, okay, is like the last 3 or 4 months, or basically, I'd say he's had some really sick tournaments the last 3 or 4 months, and some that have been exceptional. The problem is, like the first half of the year before they made those player moves, I thought Nico was far and away the best player in that team, and he was a good player, but I don't think he lived up to the superstar potential of Cold Zera and people like that half a year, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a superstar for only half the year, but I'd say like through the ups and downs of FaZe, Rain was consistently like the best player on, like, think of the tournaments in the mid portion of the year, like Cologne. I think Malmo was probably like that a little bit. Actually, they had a terrible Malmo, but Cologne was huge. Like, he was just the player that no matter how bad everyone else was playing, because I know Nico had a couple bad tournaments with them, and Olaf had a couple weaker tournaments, but Rain was always just like the badass on this team. And I think through all the roster changes, for him to keep up that level, through having, Alu and Kyo at the first portions of the year, having good tournaments there, and then having Olaf and Guardian come in, and he maintained that form. He only had one negative event throughout the whole year. I think he had such a disgusting year. I don't know if I'd maybe pick him number one, which I guess kind of defeats the purpose of this, but I'd put him in the conversation, surely. I think he deserves that honor at the very least.
Okay.
He deserves consideration, but he kind of sometimes would vanish for certain series. He would just vanish, and that hurts his case a lot. Katowice against Astralis earlier in the year, he did nothing. He went like -20 or -30, I think, in a BO5, and that's just so unacceptable for a player with his role too. He's I mean, sometimes he'll go first, but he'll oftentimes be that second, third guy in. Being -20 or -30 kill death in that specific position is just, that's pretty bad. I do think that he had an incredible year, though. I'm not arguing that at all. I just think that hurts his case a lot, and I think Nico just still was able to perform really well in that series. Regardless.
One thing I do think is kind of whack, though, is like, I mean, there's a quote that I've put on Twitter myself so many times, because it really is how I think of these sorts of topics. It's a classic quote. It's by a guy who, I forget the name. It's like one of those like ancient Greek philosophers, but it's not a super famous one. And the quote goes, "Wise men argue cases, fools decide them." Because the notion is, a fool just walks in and goes, "Oh, it's obvious, it's just this," and then walks out. Doesn't have to think anymore, doesn't have to debate the points. So the reason why I'm bringing this up now is, you could make a whole episode that would be straight fire as well, which would be like, was it Nico, was it Cold? Let's go to all the reasons, all the factors. Fans seem to think, well, no, there's no debate. It was obviously just coldzera, right? He was just the best player the whole time. This is one of the areas where if you don't start applying different contextual filters, you'll never get to the bottom of an individual player thing like this, because I can't remember who said this the other day on Twitter. Might have been Wallaby Beetle, maybe. Someone made a point that because there's so much context and so many factors that go into deciding who the best individual player is, most people just short circuit that and go, did their team win? Oh, I guess he was the best then, because you have a firm outcome, right? Is a team
the ring argument?
Lost? Yeah. The problem with that is, here's the thing. If we just build up coldzera and we say all the things he's amazing at and the things he's done and his stats, yes, they look impregnable. But here's the problem. When you're deciding things like player of the year, and you're deciding things like MVP, you do have to think of factors like, what do you do within your team? How hard is it? How much help do you have? What resources do you have? And so I have to say, coldzera has a lot of advantages over almost anyone else who would be in this discussion. Like, for example, when you want to talk about Nico, this is a guy who is speaking English, his second language, with a group of totally multinational players, some of whom have no cultural basis either, in life, and especially not in Counter-Strike. He's never played with a fucking Norwegian team or a Danish team. These are teams where you come up in those scenes, you have a sense, especially the Danish scene, you have a sense of how you're going to play, how other people are going to play. So actually, when you start to add some of these factors in, the fact that they were comparable already, you can at least make a case for Nico. It's not like it's just an open and shut case for Cold, right?
Yeah, Nico's T-sides are pretty much what carried FaZe in a lot of rounds. And there's a lot of star power on that team. Anyone can find picks, but so many times you'll just see Eco maybe half by, Nico double deagle entry, and it's just like, okay, there was no strat, obviously. Kerrigan just said spread out, go, and Nico finds a double entry, and it's like, who else is going to actually do this? Just time in and time out. Nico creates a lot for that team.
Yeah. And I'll tell you straight up, too, is if we're going to go in on the Cold argument as well, I think Fur had a much more impressive season than Cold did. I hope I'm not alone in that one, but Fur this year, or not season, he had a better year, I think, is just like the things he's able to do with that kind of a play style. That's not easy. If you think of the last 6 months of this year, everyone knows Fur is going to be aggressive. Everyone knows Fur is going to push. Everyone knows that he will be on the CT side, the most aggressive player on the map. And he still finds success with it. He still has insane tournaments overall. And that kind of an impact on an individual basis, he doesn't have anyone with him half the time, is just impressive. He doesn't have a Taco helping to set him up for some kind of a kill or an entry. He's just pushing and getting 2 kills, 3 kills.
Yeah, in Pro League, Fur pushes 2 rounds in a row. 1 round, he gets taken out by FaZe in the finals, and then or by Olaf in the finals, and then the next round, he gets a 2K. There's no setup at all. He just reads the situation and says, I think I can go here, and he does, and that just and it brings them back, it gets them into rounds that they just was a 50-50 round, and now it's just okay. Fur just won the round for you, and it's not as it might not. The thing about it that sucks is that sometimes you won't even see it because it's at the very beginning of a round. People are spread out all over the place. The observers are always super good. Shouts out to them, of course, but sometimes you won't even see it. You'll just see a random Fur kill on the scoreboard, and you're just like, how'd that happen? And now he has map control, and it's just okay. There was no utility even expended to get this kind of map control. He still has his smoke, his molly, everything, and he just is like, okay, I can just shut this down now because I can just layer my utility for the rest of the round. And
he looks so fucking bored doing it as well. That's what fucks with my head. Like you see him on the cam, and he's like, yep.
Yeah, my game was harder for you. Your mic kept going in and out where you were saying that, Moses. We could hear most of it, but like I think the wire was better. So there we go.
Yeah, I'm back. No, it's just fucking creepy that he just looks bored. Like I wish the game was more difficult for him in some way. I don't know how to do it though.
Well, that's why I have to agree with Henry in his call when it was casting it in the Pro League finals. You know where he kept going to the ladder room and he kept getting those 2Ks, or when FaZe would do the double drop on the little short ladder, and the whole thing was it did look like he was just like, how long can I keep my hand off the mouse before I put it back on and shoot them? So like, why is he setting himself like for challenges like achievement unlocked, killed FaZe players 2 rounds in a row? Like, what's this?
Only using keyboard.
The body language between Nico and Fur is just so astronomically different. It's just like Nico's stressing every round. He's like, he takes his hand off the mouse. He like does this really quick, and then he puts it back on. You can see him the whole time on the Pro League finals, and then Fur's just kind of like closes his eyes, like just okay. Like he's just so, it's just comes so easy to him, it feels like, and he's so relaxed all the time. He's like, I've been here a million times before. I know this is going to work. Or if it doesn't work, he's just like, whatever. So often too.
Which is also another factor you can build into the argument, which is that, like, listen, yes, we did also put Rain in this conversation. So we have 2 FaZe players and we have 2 SK players. But with that said, with Rain, it was mainly the last few months. Nico was also doing this shit for the first half of the year when Rain wasn't playing like this. The difference is, like, listen, I would definitely say Coldzera is the best player in SK, and I would actually probably still pick him as player of the year, quite frankly. I'm pointing out now that it's a lot more debatable than people think. But I will definitely say this. Simple Nico, players like that, they don't have anything like a Fur in terms of what Fur does to the game that then enables Coldzera. Like, if I'm Coldzera, that's like the dream type of player to play with because of how he opens up the game, because of how he's aggressive. And then you're literally a player who lives off having comms, knowing where people are, and then following up, and then making all the great decisions. Like, it's like a dream setup in that regard. And likewise, last year, okay, so Fur wasn't playing this way last year. Last year, you had Fallen, who was going super ham on all these aggressive scenarios as well. So Coldzera, both years when he's been in God mode, has had another player who was like one of the best players in the whole world right there with him, and in a way that kind of, Fallen, it wasn't as extreme. I guess he's in-game leader, so in a way it helps, but contributory in how their play maybe helps elevate yours, because you can't just ignore those factors, you know?
Here's a guy you could throw into the conversation as well. This one's probably a little bit less sexy. It's an Astralis player. It's not Device. It's Dupree. He had a monster year as well.
More towards the latter half, though, I think.
Well, I mean, he had some huge tournaments at the beginning of the year. Remember, they did that like thing where they shuffled like MVP candidates for like the first 4 events of the year. I mean, he was always changing his role, and towards the end, obviously, I mean, his ability to find impact and be impressive for that team across 3 different positions is super impressive. And I think that's always. I think maybe that's why maybe I suck at these kinds of conversations, is because I always look at like the intangibles. Like, you know, I find that ability to have that kind of success in 3 different roles, that's huge for me to like vote how good of a year someone else had. And those aren't like tangible concepts, so I guess it's just difficult to put those, compare them across players.
Especially because most people are going to go and they're going to start with the stats, and if the stats filter you out, you're not going to get in the conversation. So, for example, here's another good example, right? Admittedly, I do think that the stats do show that this guy's spiral down was a bit depressing, which is obviously ever since the player break, Adren in Gambit wasn't really as good. Like, he did start to have issues. First of all, he became the in-game leader, but before that, this is another example of where if he could have just, like, say Zeus had never left and he'd maintained that in ridiculous level of form he had for the first 6 months, I don't care what the stats would have said. I would have actually now been making a case that he was right there with Nico and Cold, because the difference is his role in Gambit was fucking bonkers. Like, he literally won so many clutches all day long for them, and like every time he would be in like a semi-lurk position, you would think the guy had a wall hack the decisions he was making. It was ludicrous.
Yeah, he's so smart.
He rolled back the years, didn't he? He was like, even just his performance in Krakow alone was like mind-boggling. I didn't understand it whatsoever. That was insanity.
And that's just an example of where you fulfill the stats part to some degree, but it is intangibles. Like, you know, it doesn't matter. There's a very big difference between 2 kills where you just hold an angle and you hit some great headshots, and 2 kills where you had to win a 1v2 where, you know, they were on opposite sides of you and you have to bait the first guy out while knowing not to look at the second. You know, like that's like masterclass level Counter-Strike in contrast to what otherwise are just 2 kills to someone else.
Yeah, he'd find openings and clutches like in the same round. It was actually amazing.
And again, this is a player like the simple example who's playing for a much worse team than these other guys we're talking about. So to be doing that in the context of it, and then even vaguely close to him in terms of stats, I can make that difference up mentally easy. I don't care what the number said on the screen, you know. It's obviously a different scenario. Okay, right. Player of the year, would you vote coldzera? I think I would just settle on coldzera. Like, I do think after all the back and forth, I think he edges it for me.
Yeah, coldzera is definitely my player of the year.
You've muted yourself, Moses. Sounds like you were going to say no. Though.
Yeah, I was coughing. Yeah, no, I wouldn't have. I would have picked Fur, to be honest with you.
Okay. Always the contrarian, right?
Someone's got to do it, Duncan. It's usually your job.
Sure. Okay, right. Here's the thing. As I think I made the point recently, well, I did. It was in this written article I did. To me, the entire concept of Team of the Year has been rendered completely worthless by people just counting like all variants of rosters of Team of the Year. Like, to me, it makes no sense to say FaZe is the Team of the Year if you're going to include the first lineup they had, because what the fuck did Alo and Kiyoshima have to do with the second half? Nothing. In fact, they even could have played against those players. It doesn't logically make a lot of sense. So to me, I'm more interested in lineup of the year, like which 5-man lineup was the best of the year. So realistically, that's actually not a bad discussion, because you look at it now, you've got the 2 SK lineups, you've got the 2 FaZe lineups, you've got Astralis. I think right there you've got a pretty good discussion. Mute yourself again.
I keep doing that. I think I would honestly... I'd have to pick between the 2 SK lineups to be quite honest with you. I think those would be like almost my top 2. If I recall correctly. I'm trying to look up at their placings, because they actually had a sick run with Phelps. Like, despite the fact that it didn't work out, they had an insane run with him. And then they had like a really solid run. But I think I'd probably go with the SK with Phelps lineup as the Team of the Year.
Yeah, that's the one I plumped for as well, because even though, yes, I agree, recency tells you that the Bolts lineup is better, maybe even will go on to be better. In terms of placings, fucking hell, that SK with Phelps was good. And also, the way they did it was amazing. Like, they were just winning all the best of 3s, basically. Like, except for that one where G2 beat them at EPL, no one could touch these guys. And obviously, they had a similar scenario where when they played FaZe, they would beat FaZe as well. So, I think for me, that team edges it in terms of, remember, it can only be things within 2017. So it doesn't matter if we all think that SK with Bolts will do great things next year. It's 2017.
Yeah.
What's your take, mauisnake?
No, the SK with Phelps was, I think, the best 5-man lineup for sure. I think it would, at its peak, it would be any other 5-man lineup in a best of 3, best of 5 for the whole year.
No, I guess here's the one argument you could have against this lineup is, would you put anything in the stock that there was a lot of teams with kind of confusion at the time? Like, remember this, they started really getting their swing when Virtus Pro, after they had their impressive 2 to 3 months at the beginning of the year, and then they just kind of just disappeared. Astralis had some role confusion that they were shuffling around. FaZe had just gotten a new lineup and were kind of figuring things out. So is there any argument you could make where it's just that was a lineup that wasn't necessarily as good, but because every other team was kind of in flux, they were able to succeed?
Putting asterisks next to tournament wins is such a iffy subject, because then, I mean, you could discount majors previously, you could discount...
There's a lot you can do,
there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot you can do with that, and I think, at least for me, at the end of the day, the results, just a championship's a championship. They were winning bundles of championships. They won...
I mean, they did win 5 out of 6.
Yeah, with that same lineup, and that's just, maybe they faced some weaker lineups, but if that weaker lineup, I don't know, if there's always going to be some weaker lineup in some tournament for some reason, and just can't. I don't think you can overlook just how successful they were.
One factor I'll say for both of the SK lineups that they had this year, because we're obviously ignoring the temporary one they had with Fox. It was only one tournament this year. It was the major. Right. The one thing I'll say for both those teams that I actually think, if you look in history, is a pretty solid hallmark of like the best teams of their era and of all time, is the ability to win on the maps that actually aren't particularly your best maps. Like if you remember, the SK where Phelps one was the one that actually was a little bit ropey on Overpass and Train. You know, the classic maps that they were so good the year before, they weren't that good. But you know what? If they played FaZe, I'd have fucking bet my house that they were going to win those maps, even though FaZe was amazing on some of those maps, you know. So it didn't matter. Like Train at one point was FaZe's best map. They still would lose it to SK. So I think if you look in history, that's nearly always a hallmark of like the truly great team, is like they don't just win because they got a series in which they play, you know, 2 of their top 4 maps. They win when it's your map pick sometimes, or they win when it's the decider where, you know, the pick ban just meant they had to play like the 5th map in the pool or something weird like that, you know.
It is bonkers that was the lineup where they were like, yeah, we're not feeling that good. We don't, you know, this lineup isn't really gelling the way we'd like it to.
Here's the sickest thing, Moses. This is one thing NA can take credit for. Remember, cause Team Liquid beat them in 2 best-of-3 series. They actually helped to kill that lineup.
Yeah, they're just... We're
really clinging anything, aren't we?
Listen, you can't necessarily win a war, but you could be like Leonidas and throw that spear that went across that God King's face, make him bleed a little bit, and then get killed anyway.
Yeah, and then FNS destroyed Immortals, so we've got a couple of accomplishments there.
Listen, they're doing some good work.
Killed 2 teams, killed 2 Brazilian lineups. NA is just the Brazilian killers, I guess.
As a last... which is ironic because it was a Brazilian who wanted to kill an NA player. So, no, anyway. So, as a last topic, okay, as the last one to round it all up, let's just pick. And for this one, we're not going to do a consensus, just each pick one. So, start thinking of it now. And I'll tell you mine so you can think of yours. What was your tournament of the year? So, start thinking now, because I'll actually go ahead and say, for me, it's between 2 tournaments. And this is thinking of the whole year and taking them all into account. The 2 for me that stood out were DreamHack Malmo and Epicenter.
Okay, in terms of like what, like we thinking like production quality, we thinking like competition at this event, or? Okay.
Everything. Just what to you was the best tournament of the year. So, no one has to pick one of these tournaments. They can pick whatever one they want. And personally, I actually will come down on the side of, I'll say DreamHack Malmo, because the thing I liked about DreamHack Malmo was it had nearly all, I think it had pretty much the best teams there. Yeah. It had a great format because it had that format where they changed it so that you had to win a best-of-3 to get out of the group stage. So actually, we saw some really good best-of-3s there. We saw North beat SK, for example. That was one where they got out, so that makes their run to the final a lot more legit. But there were so many best-of-3s for the top teams that I thought you got a lot more play out of it. And sure, I'll say it had a con in as much as it was one of the first tournaments after the player break. That's not great. But the actual level of the matches, there were some really fucking good matches here. There was obviously like the G2 against SK round of 8. I thought even the NIP versus G2 game was pretty good. You had some pretty good matches across the board. You had this amazing upset of like the Fitch Gambit beating Astralis. Like who the fuck could have seen that coming? So for me, I just thought as an all-round tournament, I thought that tournament was great. And I thought actually like for DreamHack, a tournament circuit which sadly has fallen by the wayside, the Masters do still retain that prestige for me.
Yeah. I thought of this question before the show even, and I actually would have said Epicenter. I would have said the same tournaments. Like what? Like I wish you asked it and asked me first, because I would. Okay. Now I feel like I'm just copying you, but no, I would have said this. I would have said the same tournaments. Actually, they had the prestige in that a lot of great teams were at them. The production value in both was really insanely good, and the matchups were also incredibly just fun to watch. I'd say. There was so many memorable BO3s from Malmo, but if any tournament organizers are listening to this, ESG Tour, you guys did a great job also. I thought that was a lot of fun to watch, actually.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, then I didn't talk about Epicenter, so what did you like about Epicenter?
Epicenter's production value in between sets was really good. The stage itself is just so... to use a killed word doesn't see much play anymore. It was epic. It was so sick. It was like
they centered around that epic nature in some ways. All right.
They do a really phenomenal job. The people that put that together. I don't really remember too many, if any, maybe like a couple technical audio issues, but that seems to happen in every tournament. Just thinking of those little things. But that tournament was super well run. Just the stage. I mean, the stage itself is so cool to look at too. Like when they're showing just crowd shots or just stage shots, any of that stuff. The production, just the camera work's good too. I mean, they do so much well with that tournament that goes beyond just the games and the teams that are even there. Just the whole experience of viewing the stream is really good.
Sure. What do you think, Moses? What's your tournament?
I mean, mine is going to be so biased, but I like the Epicenter, like the best of threes, the games that they had there. The format was sick. Just like the fact that the grand final was so epic, like that, I thought that was so incredible, and I think that kind of made that tournament for me was how incredible that grand final was of SK versus VP with VP kind of coming out of nowhere to have a good tournament run. That was sick, and I honestly, I'm one of the people. I'm entirely biased when it comes to VP. I want them to win more. Like I just think Counter-Strike does so much better. I think it's so much more exciting when we have Virtus Pro actually being competitive. So if that for me was huge. In terms of that, it's really tough to think of for me because I work so many of these events. My experience of these events is often skewed by how it was to work it and behind the scenes and everything. And in that sense, I mean, if I go that route as well, I thought Pro League finals at the end of the year in Udensa was really, really nice. I thought obviously Sydney was great. Was a lot of fun to be down there. But in terms of like the pure Counter-Strike competition, that Epicenter was pretty phenomenal in how that tournament kind of ended up.
I also think, as a funny little side note, right, generally, if I'm talking about this topic, I always add the caveat that, like, I don't blame tournament organizers because, you can set up a tournament, you can have great formats, you can have a qualification, but you never know if the matches are going to be good. But I will say this, if any tournament organizer is listening, just think about the two tournaments that me and mauisnake went for, Epicenter and DreamHack Malmo, because yes, they technically couldn't control if the games were amazing, but both tournaments, we stressed, had really good formats. And if you pick a really good format, and then you can get the good teams there, and it has the prestige. Now, at that point in time, you've done all but have the matches happen. So I think you're just more likely to have very good matches, It's tougher with a bad format to have a sick tournament,
Yeah, no, it really is. And I mean, we've seen plenty of tournaments that have gotten so super lucky with how well the games were at their events. That specific event just like seems like it's going to be a disaster, and then the games are so incredibly good that you forget about all the other problems that are going on.
I'll give you an example. Even though I absolutely love Face It and I love ECS, the ECS Season 3 finals looked sick because they had all the good teams there. They were lucky every good team qualified from Europe. Then the actual finals had all those amazing matches, like the semis and the final were great. And then we had like even the Team Liquid Astralis game in the group stage was pretty cool, right? But what happened was, because their format is much more limited, you just have 4 teams from each region, you play best of ones for the first team to get out, then you just only have semis on. Well, you saw for Season 4 how it was the same exact format, but they got a totally different type of tournament because now some of the good teams didn't qualify, you had stand-ins, you had some games that weren't as crazy. It was only really the final lived up for that one. So that's just a good example, I think, of how if you want to kind of guarantee, you've got to kind of go a certain route in terms of the format, I think.
I do want to say also shout out to the teams this year, because remember last year, Duncan, it was like the running joke that we had that the semifinals were always going to be good and the grand final was always going to suck ass. Yeah. This was the year of the grand final. Like we had so many disgusting grand finals. Kicked off with the E-League major, credible finals to have there at a major as well, which was awesome. And that just continued throughout the whole year. So more of that is incredible. Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That Epicenter BO5 was probably one of the best just series I've ever seen, period. I think it probably is the best series I've ever seen.
After the Atlanta major, and then after the FaZe Astralis back and forth rivalries, I didn't know if we would be able to get like a grand final that would top that, but that Epicenter grand final in BO5 was just so unreal.
Yeah, that was so crazy.
Actually, the event I just talked about, ECS Season 3, had a very good final as well, the FaZe SK one, where FaZe won like comfortably on the first map, and then SK had to win both the next 2 maps in like overtime. It was like super close and they were winning all. That was an amazing final, actually. That one kind of flew under the radar because it's so early in the year, people will forget it. They've seen too much since then.
Hey guys, this is Patrick Carl-Sedermoon. You might know me as the guy with the most IM medals in the world, or something like that. I'm also the CGO of Fnatic, and you're watching Duncan Thorin Shields YouTube channel. Pleasure being here.